All right, Erev Tov, everyone. Good to see you, and it's good to see most of you. I'm going to have a little bit difficulty tonight because I had some cataract surgery, so I'm not seeing very well. So if I make some mistakes, I hope you'll forgive me for the errors. I do see that there is someone there that maybe might. Fortunately, I don't see him so well, Howard. Okay, we're ready to begin. I'm going to start with a pasuk.
And then sorry to interrupt. I just want to remind everyone that tonight's has a special sponsorship.
Right. This sponsorship is in memory of Rabbi Victor Amster, Harav Avigdor ben Harav Shol Elchanan, and it is this year is dedicated by the Amster and Skidelsky families. Thank you very much. And we thank them very much. May his neshama have an aliyah. Those of us who knew Victor, those who knew the nifter, always realized that he himself was a powerful figure, very and a very, very fine person. I'd like to start with a pasuk actually in Mishlei, in Shir Hashirim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wrote Shir Hashirim as the quintessential expression of love between Hashem and the Jewish people. And he writes in the name of the Chatan, the person who is the young man, he writes, Kulach yafa rayati, umum ein bach. In his expression of love for his beloved, he says to her, Kulach yafa rayati, you are completely beautiful. Umum ein bach, there is no blemish upon you. Now, I think all of us realize, of course, ein ish tzadik ba'aretz asher yaseh tov v'lo yechta. There's no one on this earth who is perfect, not even Moshe Rabbeinu. Certainly, Judaism rejects the idea that anybody who was ever born is completely infallible. The Gemara talks about certain people, but even so, we know that Moshe Rabbeinu, even the great Moshe Rabbeinu, did that which was wrong. But yet, this particular expression from Shir Hashirim identifies and exemplifies the love between two people who share a destiny. After all, that's basically what marriage is. Marriage is when two people who have separate destinies, who have separate, up until the time that they met, they may not even have known each other, or they certainly didn't think that they were going to share their life together. And each of them had their own plans and their own ideas. But then when they meet and they decide to become married and share their life together, then that life becomes a shared destiny. That is what it means to share a Jewish home. And so therefore, we know, though, that even in the greatest of marriages, everyone realizes that no one is perfect. So what does Shlomo HaMelech mean when he writes these words, which of course Hashem, which exemplifies the love of Hashem to the Jewish people? Kulach yafa rayati umum ein bach. You're completely beautiful. It means to say when two people are so deeply and profoundly in love, they overlook the imperfections that each of them has. And certainly, while there's always going to be ups and downs in a shared life, but ultimately, the person on days and throughout their lives, they feel this idea of mum ein bach, that they overlook whatever imperfections there are, and in that way, they're able to share their destiny together. Now, if we turn to Bamidbar, one second. If we turn to Bamidbar, Perek Kaf Gimel, Pasuk Kaf Aleph, we have another person who's speaking about Hashem and Hashem's love affair with the Jewish people, and it is none other than Bilam. Bilam, who was very far from perfect, nevertheless, however, he may have been far from perfect. Some people say that even in his ability, his intelligence, and in his nevuah, he actually rivaled Moshe Rabbeinu, who was the Adon Kol HaNevi'im. Balak, who is implored to curse the Jewish people, utters several very, very famous phrases, very powerful phrases, and we're going to examine one of them today. Perek Kaf Gimel, Pasuk Kaf Aleph. He speaks when he now speaks in praise of the Jewish people. He says, "Lo hibit aven b'Yaakov." God has not seen any sin in Yaakov, meaning the Jewish people. V'lo ra'a amal b'Yisrael, nor has he gazed upon or seen the heaviness of wrongdoing b'Yisrael. The word amal means a heavy work that someone is doing. It can be a compliment or it can be the opposite. So, for example, when the Torah is talking about shetiyu, or when we say the bracha shetiyu amelim b'Torah, the mitzvah of being amelim, ayin mem lamed, that means the joy of extreme dedication to the fulfillment of the Torah. But amal can also mean, and this is what it means here, the heaviness of wrongdoing. Am keved avon. Yeshayahu Navi says that it is a people keved, weighed down by their own sin. And that's what Bilam uses the term amal here, according to our Meforshim. It means that which weighs us down. Okay? Hashem Elokav imo, God, his Lord, imo, is with him. Utruat melech bo, and the simplest explanation would be Truat melech bo means the sound of kingship is there. In other words, it's a metaphor indicating that when the Jewish people act in a manner in which we are mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh, that when we are indeed a kingdom of people, so the king is associated with truot, the sound of shofar, or the sound of trumpets, but they usually herald the coming of the king. And so, despite his antipathy for the Jewish people, Bilam is moved in very beautiful verse to praise them. And we're going to examine this evening the praise of the Jewish people as expressed by Bilam. By the way, one of the things which I'm sure you're all aware of is, when we say, we enter a shul, we say, Matovu alecha Yaakov mishkanotecha Yisrael. It's said by Jews entering the synagogue at any time. Those are the words that were uttered by Bilam. Matovu alecha Yaakov. How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob, mishkanotecha Yisrael, your dwelling places, Jewish people. Notice there and here, two words are used to describe the Jewish people. Lo hibit aven, he did not see an oven. V'lo ra'a amal. We have the word aven, which is a form of sin and intense sin, and amal, again, as we said before, means that acts which weigh us down spiritually. Got to ask the question though. It's very apparent that Bilam was not Maver Sedra each week, because if he was, we would see that God sees on an ongoing basis from the time we were in Mitzrayim to the time that we left Mitzrayim and wandered in the Midbar and didn't listen over and over and over again. And then of course had spontaneous rebellions and had premeditated rebellions. And so how could Bilam truthfully say, Lo hibit aven b'Yisrael? He didn't see anything. Of course God saw. Every parsha is replete with the reckoning of God with the wrongdoing of the Jewish people. But the answer, I think, once again, resides in the pasuk that we have in Shir Hashirim of Kulach Yafa Rayati, that despite the wrongdoing that we engaged in, then and now, there is a love affair that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has with the Jewish people. Now, there is. I once heard a beautiful statement that that love, when two people fall in love, so there is usually something which connects them. Something. It could be intelligence. It could be beauty. It could be humor. It could be material wealth of some sort. Something that draws each of the two parties together. They may have different reasons why they're drawn together, but it's drawn together. And if they decide to share their life together, or if they become long-term friends, so the idea is that what originally bonded them, what originally attracted one to the other, eventually fades. It eventually fades. Except people, even though it fades, what you have left after that is pure, unadulterated love. I want to tell you an incident that I had many years ago concerning this type of love, in which we had guests at our home, and unfortunately, the man was suffering from Alzheimer, and his wife. We had them both over, and we were talking. I remember at the time, it was actually almost 40 years ago. We were talking about the Lebanon war. And we were talking about should the Jewish troops go, the Israeli troops go to Beirut? Should they not go to Beirut? And it was a very lively discussion. We had several families there, and each person was contributing. And in the middle, the man, who had obviously once had a man of great intellect, great ability, he looked up at the ceiling and said, "Oh, chandelier." And then he said, "Here's a fork." Now, what happened next, something that I will never forget. His wife put her hand on his hand, leaned over and kissed him on the cheek and said, "I love you, dear." That is pure, unadulterated love. Whatever drew them together before, they had been married probably 40 years, was gone. Certainly from his part, there was no wit, there was no humor, there was no intensity. There was the shell of a person as he once was. But when his wife looked at him and saw him, she saw, "Kulach yafarayati, you are completely beautiful to me. There is no blemish with you." This, I would say to you, is the concept of Hashem's love for the Jewish people. Certainly, we do wrong all the time. We're in the midst of doing wrong all the time, starting with Mitzrayim and moving all the way through. But nevertheless, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Bilam got this right. Bilam got it right. Lo hibit aven biyakov. He has never allowed. What it really means is he overlooked that which we had done wrong. Over and over and over again, he overlooks. Now, that's the meaning, I think, of the first half of the pasuk. But then we find the phrase, we have the difference between Yaakov and Yisrael. And this phrase usually, and many Meforshim seem to agree in one form or another with this idea. Yaakov is usually the less sophisticated aspect of the Jewish people. Sometimes it's a less sophisticated people. Sometimes it's a less sophisticated cultures. But Yaakov is, although of course Yaakov Avinu is very, very sophisticated, but the same man became called Yisrael. And that's because that term, Yisrael, indicates a more sophisticated, more enhanced growth of Yaakov Avinu. Now, Bilam says Yaakov and Yisrael. First, he talks about Yaakov and then Yisrael. And the Orach Chaim HaKadosh says that the Yaakov are the people who are what he calls the Hamon, the Amcha, the people, most of us. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at us, and again, he overlooks year after year that which we do wrong. And then the Or Chaim says that what is Yisrael? Yisrael is representative of the people who are sophisticated, learning people who do mitzvot constantly, not just going through life, but actually always looking to make themselves better each and every day. And therefore they are called Yisrael. And at the very end, he says that the people who are Yisrael, when the Torah uses the term Yisrael, it's the people who serve Hashem out of Ahava. As you know, there are two ways that we serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. One can be from Yira, and one can from Ahava. Yira is a visceral fear that one has of punishment, lower level of interaction. And of course, even in any human relationships too, there are people who have a relationship with other people out of Yira because they either are afraid of a negative result, or it could be they want something, but not because of the intrinsic love that they have for that person. But Ava is, as he says, those people who serve Hashem with Ava are called Yisrael. He says, Ela ohev hatov ameh shehu tov. That when people who love HaKadosh Baruch Hu serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it is through Ava. Ava is that not only are you looking for a result, but the actual act itself is done with love. As opposed to Yira, you're only interested in the result, either for fending some sort of bad that may occur or getting some sort of reward. That's Yira. Ava is the very act itself, the very act of benching lich, the very act of making a bracha, the very act of doing any of the mitzvah that we do gives the tzaddik, as he calls it, the Baal Chesed too, gives them the joy of serving a Kodesh Baruch. So the act is intrinsic to the service. Now, Menachem Tzion, the great Rabbi Menachem B. Sachs, made a very, very beautiful statement. He said, on our pasuk, he said, Mi shelo mabit aven b'Yaakov, mi shelo ro'eh amal b'Yisrael. He says, it's not talking only about God. It's talking, when he says, lo he beat aven, naturally we're thinking it's God who didn't look at other Jews and see wrong, or was not critical of us. But Rabbi Sachs, who again, by the way, founded the Associate Talmud Torahs in Chicago, I had the pleasure of knowing him and being inspired by him when he was here. He said that it's not limited to God. He said, Mi shelo he beat aven b'Yaakov. Whoever does not see or criticize the sin of his fellow Jew, v'lo ra'a amal b'Yisrael, nor does he, again, two separate acts, but he doesn't spend his time criticizing him. Hashem Elokav imo. That is symbolic of the fact that this person has God with him. Why? Because there is a concept within Judaism. It's a Latin phrase, but this is the concept, and the concept is imitatio Dei. When the Torah says you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your might, that is such a hard concept. We say it every day twice in Kriyat Shema, in the morning and the evening, but when you think about it, loving God is not like loving anything else in existence. We love our parents because they provided for us and we could see tangibly what they provided. We I mean, I have grandchildren, so I am sure he loves his father very much. He took him to the Cubs game the other day. All right. So that's a love on a child's level, and it's an appropriate love on a child's level. The Cubs didn't play so appropriately, but he will remember that. The first time he was ever at a ball game, he'll remember that, and he'll remember it with love. But loving HaKadosh Baruch Hu is different. And Chazal knew that it's different. So they said two things. Number one, that the way you show your love for God is by imitating God. Ma'hurachu ma'fatarachu. Just as God is compassionate, you must be. And here he says, just as here, Rabbi Sachs says that when he says, Lo he beat Avin b'Yaakov, when it says that the person does not criticize a Jew because he's always seeing within him some weakness. So he says, that Jew is acting like God. And when he's acting like God, Hashem Elokav Imo. Now, Hashem is with him. Now, I want to spend a moment or two with you on the concept of Utruat Melech Bo. Remember when I interpreted the pasuk before, the word truo is usually the sound of a shofar or the sound of a trumpet of some sort of horn. But it's interesting that Chazal tell us that there's another possibility. There is the shoresh reish ayin hey. I've spoken about it before. The word reish ayin hey means to pasture, to graze, as sheep. The person who enables the sheep to graze is called a roeh. Okay, it's called a shepherd because he allows the sheep to graze. And what they do when they graze, Rav Hirsch mentions this, when a sheep grazes, but the truth is it's when any animal eats, what does it do? It ingests the food, the nutrients enter, and part of them, of course, are exited, but that food now becomes in some way a part of him. He says that's why people who are good friends and people who are in love are called reim ahuvim. When we talk about it at a chassid, reim. Why, says Rav Hirsch? Because when two people truly love each other, doesn't have to be in a marriage, it can be two friends, deep, abiding love. So then a part of each enters the other. A part of each nourishes the other spiritually. And when that happens, so each becomes actually bonded to the other one through the process of reim. Now, Rabbi Soloveitchik mentions, he says here, Truat Melech, he says, you don't have to limit that reading to being the sound of the shofar, that when Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky or Reb Chaim Kanievsky enters the room, it's as if trumpets were there. Yes, it certainly could be. But Rabbi Soloveitchik and also the Chassam Sofer say it has to do with love. Reim ahuvim, truat hamelech bo. Truat melech means the affection, the love, and what Rabbi Yoshe Ber calls theo. He has a propensity of saying large concepts. Theo comradeship, meaning to say the relationship of man to God. It's bonded because whenever we act properly, and Bilam understood that, and he knew that, and so according to him, and according to the Chassam Sofer, that we have earned over time, with all of our faults as a people, the affection of a Kodesh Baruch. Truat Melech doesn't only mean the regal sounding of the horn, which tells people that the Jews are here, but it means Truat Melech means the love and affection abides within us. Truat, the affection of the king is with us. So this is what Bilam said in spite of himself. All of this, of course, in one pasuk. So just to briefly review, we know that there's a difference between Yaakov and Israel. Yaakov indicates the Jews who are good Jews, but they don't necessarily, they're not necessarily the most ambitious forms of Jewish pursuit. And we know that there's a difference between Av and an Amal, but Amal is what we talked about. Amal means the heaviness of wrongdoing that literally weights us down. So he says, God doesn't see that. And of course, the question we ask is, how could God not see it? We see it every single week. But when you love somebody, when you really love someone, you are capable of putting that love in the background. It's not that you don't know that the person has failings, but it is that the love actually overrides those faults that a person has. And that's what allows human beings to share their lives and their destinies together. And not only is it with human beings, that sharing and that reim, that idea of imbibing and deriving spiritual nutrition one from the other, that is an imitation of God. That's the God-man and God-Jew relationship. And so it should be with each and every one of us. And we'll conclude again, as Rabbi Menachem Bisak said, if Jews act like God acts, a Jew who doesn't, you can't always ignore things that are wrong, but a Jew who is not burdened by what other people do that aren't right. It doesn't get in the way of his love of other Jews. That person is Hashem Elokav Imo. That person, symbolically, we can say, that person is God with him. And he thereby fulfills the mitzvah of imitatio Dei, of imitating God. Okay, everybody, one other thing I want to say, and that is that beginning this coming week, there'll be 2 shiurim, one on Wednesday night, one Shabbos morning at 8:30. The only thing is that they're really essentially will be the same. So if you heard tonight's shiur, there might be some small changes on Shabbos. But if people didn't and want to know, Rabbi Matanki and the show want very much that we should begin Shabbos morning with a Parsha shiur. So I wish everybody a good evening and thank you for listening.
Great as always.
Oh,
Thank you. Thank you,
very
Rabbi.
much.
Thank you so much.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening.